Yeah, I mean, look, a lot of absurd things were said there. Like any mention of the crown prince. I mean, the guy's the son of a former dictator of Iran. He has zero credibility with the Iranian people. Look, the Iranian regime
That's absolutely
a
false.
disaster.
He is the most he is the most popular figure of any Iranians. Are you Iranian? Ask the Iranians yourself.
Okay,
it's very, very clear.
Oh, please,
While there are some people who don't support him, the vast majority of them do support the Shah.
That was journalist and activist Emily Schrader giving a knockout verbal punch on Piers Morgan's show Uncensored about 1 year ago. The recipient, another one of his regular guests, Chunk Wager. Welcome. This is the third and final episode in this State of Tel Aviv and Beyond series, taking a hard look at how independent media has covered Israel in the war with Hamas and the recent conflict with Iran. We focus in this series on Piers Morgan and his show Uncensored, not because he's the biggest, he's huge, but because he has been so laser focused since October 7th on all things Israel. And he's also demonstrated a penchant for platforming some very sketchy characters, outright extremist Israel and Jew haters, repeatedly, like Chub Wager, who you just saw and heard. Today, we speak with two prominent activists with huge followings on social media. Emily Schrader, who is also a journalist, and Ridvan Aydemir, also known on YouTube as the ApostateProphet. Emily Schrader has been a repeat and feisty guest on Uncensored. She tells us what she likes about Piers and his show, and what she's been liking little less in recent months. Ridvan Aydemir, the ApostateProphet on YouTube, was in discussion with Uncensored producers to appear on the show when Piers Morgan himself attacked Ridvan directly on social media. For what, you might ask? Well, you'll have to listen and decide for yourself. Ridvan was raised in a strict Muslim environment. He knows his stuff. And he dismisses Piers Morgan as a clownish entertainer with no values or desire to discuss difficult issues and ideas in order to find some sort of answer, truth, better way. Like Lee Kern in our second episode, Ridvan thinks Piers Morgan is in it for money and clicks. Full stop. I'm Vivian Berkovich, former Canadian ambassador to Israel. Let's do this. Wednesday, June 25th, just before noon in Israel. Emily Schrader, thank you so much for taking time to speak with State of Tel Aviv today.
Happy to be here.
So busy times for all of us. I know you're looking fresh and awake as always, which is an accomplishment these days.
Looks are deceptive.
Yeah, well, you're doing a good job. You're a familiar face to many of our viewers and listeners. You are on media all over the world, all the time, commenting on the issues of the Middle East. But your area of particular expertise, of course, is Iran and what's going on there. So just want to kind of give those of our viewers and listeners who aren't familiar with you what they're listening to and who they're listening to. And among other things, you have been a regular guest on the Piers Morgan show, Uncensored, over months now or years. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how long it's been running.
It's been running for many years. I've been on a couple of times in the last, I would say, since October 7th, so the last 2 years.
Okay, I know since October 7th he's been out. And you've been on more than a couple of times, have you not?
I've been on many times, yeah.
Okay, so what we're talking about today, I want to be really clear. You're a journalist, you're super experienced, you also speak to groups, you get out on university campuses. You were at the Oxford University debate that sort of exploded into, I think chaos is fair.
Yes, definitely.
You've seen a lot, and feel free to add whatever you want to the color and the context. But the Piers Morgan show has become something of a flashpoint and a focal point internationally. And people are saying that he is platforming Holocaust deniers, anti-Semites, Israel haters, and there are many accusations, comments that he just kind of gives them free rein. He just lets them rip and doesn't interrupt, stop, and hold them to account in the same way that he does others, like you, who may actually believe that the state of Israel has a right to exist and advocate in support of that proposition. How do you feel about the way I just put things? Do you agree with that, more or less?
So I do think he has given the opportunity to some individuals who are explicitly anti-Semitic, who have engaged in Holocaust revisionism or denial, such as Candace Owens, and several others. He also had Hassan Piker and Mohammed Hijab. But I actually take issue with some of the criticism of him, of people saying that he stops all of the pro-Israel speakers or the people on Israel's side from speaking, but not the anti-Israel people. I've seen him do both. Actually, I have seen him for sure hold certain individuals to account on their ridiculous claims. Some of the debates, even that I was in, he was very, very harsh with Abby Martin, who's a notorious anti-Semite. Rania Khalek, another one. When they expressed support for terror organizations, he was pretty firm with them, and really did hold them to account. That being said, I think Piers is going for, it seems like Piers is going for, as a journalist, a more nuanced conversation in the way that he moderates. The problem is that the guests he brings are not at that level. Like, I'm happy to debate someone who can actually carry on an intellectual debate about these issues, someone who is well researched and knows these issues. But instead, what I've encountered more recently is people who scream and throw temper tantrums and don't actually make legitimate arguments or have genuine criticism of the state of Israel. I will say that more recently he did something with Konstantin Kisin, who's been like a very nuanced voice on a lot of these issues. And I think that those are the kinds of guests he maybe should be aiming for a little bit more, because when you bring people on like Anna Kasparian or Cheng, who I debated several times, like, these are not serious people. These are not people who have the academic or any other form of credentials to speak about these issues with credibility. They're people who are jokes. They aren't real journalists. They aren't real experts. And I think that's been more of the problem than Piers himself. That being said, there have also been people he's had on that are, as I mentioned, very credible on these issues. People even on the other side that disagree with me, who have brought up interesting points, valid arguments on the more complex issues. It's just that when you bring people who are known and proven anti-Semites who do not have credibility to speak about these issues, like Candace Owens, so this brings up a lot of problems, because it's actually giving them an opportunity to spew this kind of disinformation. And it is, in the case of Candace, disinformation. And that's very problematic. Some of the issues that she has claimed, or the ridiculous things that she has noted, are blatantly false. And Piers didn't really hold her to account on any of those issues. And I'm not quite sure why, because I think that he does know better. I don't know if it's just coming from a place where he wants to sort of give people an opportunity to make their case. But it is problematic. It's not black and white, but it is problematic, some of the guests that he's had. That being said, a lot of the Jewish community and the pro-Israel voices who are saying, oh, he's an anti-Semite, or he doesn't let any pro-Israel people speak, all of this I reject completely. He has, even though there have been incidents when he hasn't allowed me to speak, even when I agreed with him, in fact, he also has done the opposite. I've also seen him do the opposite to other anti-Israel speakers. And I think that criticism is not warranted. I think some of the pro-Israel voices who have had a hard time on this show were not qualified to speak about the issues they're speaking about, did not know how to handle a professional, especially TV, debate. It's not a courtroom. It's not a Knesset committee. It's not a meeting between diplomats. It's not any of those things. And if you don't know how to navigate the conversation in a situation like that, especially if it's not your first language, then don't do it.
It's interesting, because a friend of mine recently likened going on Piers more to being in a knife fight than in a formal debate, where you have, rules and strictures and time limits. And that may be a bit harsh, but I think it sort of gets to the point that you're making. You threw out a lot, and I want to just go back and unpack a few things, because you made some great points. I wanted to speak to you because you've been on so frequently, and because every single clip that I've seen with you, you've been composed, professional. Maybe I missed it, but I've never seen you lose your cool or become frustrated or swear or get aggressive. And that happens a lot. And it does seem to be part of the Piers Morgan model. He does try to poke the bears and hit those spots. And the fact is, that's the type of journalism that he seems to be practicing and promoting. I happen to think, I'm not like the biggest fan, and I can't say I've watched every show, but I do think that there's been a change in how he's covered these things from the beginning to the present. There have been undulations and changes in how he approaches various issues. He is clearly ratings driven. Not that there's anything wrong with that, because everyone wants eyeballs and clicks. That's the game. But, I come from the old school of journalism. I've been working in the field professionally as a lawyer and as a journalist since the early 90s, actually the late 80s. And I worked when there were really strict ethical guidelines and parameters, and those have eroded. And they've eroded for a whole bunch of reasons, but one of them, of course, is the lack of regulation and the kind of free-for-all that the internet is. And that's his playpen. He's in the internet. He owns it. He's got millions and millions of viewers. So, someone like me has to look and question, what's guiding your journalism, Piers Morgan? Is it just the numbers? Or are you really trying to generate good, strong, meaningful intellectual debate? You made that point. I've had this discussion with many friends who have been on the show. We may even have had it in the past. I'm all for open debate and good, strong, smart debate and discussion. But when you take Konstantin Kisin and put him on with comic Dave Smith, when you take Jonathan Conricus and put him on with Anna Kasparian or Bassem Youssef, I don't care if they have 20 million followers on Instagram. And what that says to me, that paradigm, is Piers wants to maximize his eyeballs and his clicks, because Bassem Youssef and Jonathan Conricus, to me, it's a joke. Why do that? And you raise that very effectively. He's not making an effort, or his producers don't seem to be making an effort to put on peer-to-peer.
Yeah, I think that's been one of the largest problems. And I agree with you that there has been a shift over time since October 7th. A lot of people have accused him of becoming anti-Semitic, whereas he used to be critical of Hamas. Now he's critical of Israel. I reject that. I think a lot of the claims that he brings up are valid questions. The problem is that the debates he has, because of the people who are invited, at least in some of these cases, as you mentioned, Dave Smith with someone who actually is interested in a genuine dialogue on key issues like Konstantin, that's not really a fair debate. You're not really going to get anywhere. And something interesting about that debate in particular was Konstantin noted at the beginning, I am not an expert on these issues. And that's part of the reason I feel comfortable actually having a genuine conversation with Dave Smith, despite the fact that I disagree with his views. And I think that's actually a very humble and accurate thing to say. Konstantin is there to have a debate about what the issues are. And what he thinks personally, but he's not an expert on that. And the problem is you have people who present themselves as experts who are not, who don't have any lived experience in this conflict, who don't have any stake in it, who don't speak the languages, who have no military experience. The list goes on and on. So this is a problem. This is a problem when you're talking about issues that are affecting people's lives on both sides, on the Palestinian side and, of course, on the Israeli side. And I agree that this is something that Piers, or at least, I don't know, his producers, I'm not sure who's making the decisions there, have brought people that are not really of equal caliber when it comes to having an intellectual or even journalistic conversation about what's happening on the ground in this conflict. And I think that we see this conflation across across different networks. Piers is just, one example, but all of the networks have been doing this. I mean, the people that most of the U.S. media has had on speaking about the war in Gaza aren't even here. They prefer to have people who live in New York or Washington, D.C. to speak about the war that we're living in. We're the ones getting bombed. And yet you see people from the New York Jewish community commenting on what Israel should be doing. Like, it's ridiculous. And it's not because they're credible voices or they're experts or they have years of policy making on these issues. It's because they have 200,000 followers on Instagram and they think that it's going to get them traction. And that's very, very dangerous because you're dumbing down what the actual issues are. I mean, some of these people who are using this war in order to promote themselves through media, they don't even care about this issue. They don't even care what's going on or what the ramifications are of the policies that they're arguing because they don't live with the consequences. They don't live here. And yet you see the networks continue to promote them as somehow credible voices. And it really damages the understanding of these issues, especially the complex issues. When you have people speak about this who don't actually know what's going on. And Bassem Youssef on the other side is a great example as well. I mean, this guy is a comedian. Why do we have comedians opining on international news about a conflict that neither of them, not Bassem, not Dave Smith, are living in? It's crazy. It's craziness. And people are entitled to their opinions, but they shouldn't be treated as experts when they, in fact, are not in any capacity whatsoever. At least in Douglas Murray's case, he was here on the ground for many months reporting.
It's not even just the having been there, done that thing. I think it's also the lack of seriousness in terms of intellectual engagement on the part of many people, or they're so hard-baked in their ideology that they are incapable of having a remotely proper discussion. And Konstantin Kisin, who you raised as having intellectual integrity, is a really good example because he too is a comedian. He just also happens to be a very serious man who has a big intellect, and he takes big ideas and big issues very seriously. And I guess I just want to finish up with a few questions. One is, what is this infatuation with so-called comets? I don't even know if Dave Smith is funny. I'd never heard of him before this, but Piers Morgan has clearly made it his kind of, mission to promote this guy. There are a lot of comedians out there, Lenny Bruce types, who are actually really intelligent, really well informed, and who could fit the bill if he's so hell-bent on using comedians to deal with what are probably the most salient, urgent geopolitical issues of our time.
I think that Piers is an entertainer. I mean, this isn't an Oxford Union debate. It's not structured. He wants eyeballs. He wants attention. And like you said at the beginning, inherently, there's nothing wrong with that. But there has to be a balance between bringing people who are simply irresponsible, like in the case of Muhammad Hijab, for example, or I would argue also Bassem Youssef, people who are spreading things that are blatantly untrue, like Bassem Youssef or Candace Owens. These are people who shouldn't be given any form of credibility, no matter how much traction their insane comments get on social media, which, by the way, is not reflective of reality. We know that there's a lot of subversion going on these platforms. So just because someone gets a lot of attention on these platforms doesn't necessarily mean that anything that they say has credibility. In terms of Dave Smith, I'm not quite sure why Piers is so obsessed with promoting him. I don't find him funny in the first place, aside from his political views. But I think it's very dangerous when you have a comedian who doesn't actually have any credibility on foreign policy issues, spewing this isolationist nonsense when he doesn't actually understand anything outside of the United States. Regardless of what one's conclusion is at the end of what the United States or what the West or what Israel should be doing, to have someone who's a comedian that doesn't really have any military experience or policymaking experience be lecturing millions and millions of people on social media, and then because of people like Piers, millions of people through mainstream media, is very dangerous, because a lot of the arguments, the gotcha moments that he thinks he's making are very easily deconstructed. And anyone who has even the simplest understanding of international relations and affairs would be able to at least argue the other side, whether or not they come to the same conclusion as him in the end. And yet it's presented as somehow like revolutionary. It's very concerning. And I think it would do everyone a favor to bring people who are entertaining, who know how to speak on TV, who know how to have a dialogue that's constructive, that those would be better guests for I guess, the side that's more critical of Israel. But that's not really what we're seeing. We're usually seeing these sort of ridiculous, clownish characters, which makes sense. I mean, that's what comedians do. They act as a sort of clown, to quote my friend Douglas Murray. So that's exactly what we're seeing.
I don't think Candace would agree to being called a clown, nor would Bassem Youssef. Maybe Bassem Youssef would. But, I mean, he does seem to have a penchant when it comes to inviting people to articulate anti-Israel views, to inviting really extreme extremists. And I don't see a symmetry, because if there was a symmetry, you and I both know who he'd be having on, and he doesn't have those people on. But
that's a very good point. I don't recall him ever bringing on a very hardcore extremist from the Jewish or pro-Israel side. I don't recall him ever having someone on that was super, that represents sort of the Ben Gvir perspective ever. He has people like me, like Jonathan Conriquez. He's had people who generally are very reasonable and know what's going on the ground. Unfortunately, I don't think that our counterparts in those debates have been of the same caliber.
My real interest is the integrity of the journalism that is being broadcast on one of the most watched forums, platforms in the world, and whether or not he's doing the job in an appropriate and ethical way. I think he's become the most prominent, the marquee example of what has happened to journalism, how it's changed and mutated over the last few decades since we've had, the internet sort of take over. So there's no regulation, there's no central kind of standardization or standards or anything. It's the Wild West. And Piers Morgan is the focus because he's so successful. I also want to make the point, which I think is important. I've not jumped on the Piers Morgan is an anti-Semite bandwagon. To be perfectly candid, I don't care. I mean, he may be a misogynist too. I don't care. What I do care about is what I see when I tune in to his show, and whether or not, in my view, he's meeting what I would consider to be baseline professional standards. Now, he also has a very colorful past in journalism as a tabloid journalist. And he's had, ethical issues that have been thrown at him and raised in the past. And I don't want to do that and dig it up. We all have skeletons in our closet. But he does have a tendency to play it really close to the line. And I think that now, at this time, we have to look at this and ask, why? As you said, having someone like you or Conriquez on, you guys are very intelligent, super informed, professional, and in my view, moderates, right? But I want to close by asking you this. Why do you go on?
Well, I agree with what you're saying about the degradation of journalistic ethics. For sure, that has happened and is happening. And yes, it's because of social media. And my answer is the same as why I'm on social media in the first place. I think it's a cesspool of nonsense. It's the toilet bowl of humanity. And in an ideal world, I would never be on it. I would delete all my social media accounts. Unfortunately, that's not the reality we're currently living in because of factors outside of my control when it comes to journalism, when it comes to social media. And so if we're going to communicate about what's happening in Israel at all, we have to be in those places. This is the unfortunate reality. I don't have the power to change it. And that's why I think it's important that we still show up. Because if we don't show up, then the people who do are people who are more radical, who are more narcissistic and attention seeking. They're people who are focused on their own advancement rather than actually telling the story or telling accurate information about what's happening on the ground when it comes to Israel and the war with Hamas, and more recently, the conflict with Iran. So I think it's important that we still show up because the starting point of the conversation becomes infinitely more extreme when you don't have the people who are educated and who are moderate representing those ideas and being able to explain, even if it's only 10% of the audience that's actually listening. It's important that it's out there and that it's heard, because you don't always know who's going to hear it and who's going to say, wow, I didn't actually know that. Is that correct? Let me look it up. I've received messages like this from people who have watched Piers Morgan, who have said that they have learned things that they had no idea about prior to the episode. So I think it's still important to show up. What's not effective is when we have people show up and say things like, oh, well, Piers, you're just an anti-Semite. That's not actually a credible argument without a plethora of evidence. I understand why people are frustrated, but it's not helpful to advancing the debate. I'm there in order to get out information about what's happening, not in order to bash Piers Morgan because I disagree with him on something politically or because I don't agree with how he runs his show. It's not my show, it's his. And that's up to him and his producers. But if given the opportunity, of course, I'm going to speak about what's happening in Israel and ensure that the maximum amount of eyeballs and ears hear and see what's actually happening on the ground in Israel, because we don't really have another alternative. And until such a time as we have ratings of, the caliber of Piers Morgan on shows that are more accurate and do promote more nuanced conversation, I will continue to do so. And I think that anyone else who's capable of having an intelligent debate should as well. That being said, I do think we should also push him and encourage Piers Morgan and other journalists to promote people who are more intellectual on these issues in order to advance the discussion instead of simply becoming a circus like Jerry Springer of 2025.
Yeah, that's my column, the Jerry Springer of geopolitics. Emily, thank you. You're a lioness. You've been doing incredible work, and please continue doing it. I have to say, I'm really encouraged to hear what you just said, which is that going into this kind of mosh pit, which is what it is, of stuff, bad people, bad views, not often the most professional environment, but that you feel that you do have the opportunity to influence people and to help them hear and see points of view that they may not otherwise encounter. And that's really, at the end of the day, the ultimate test. Is it just a silo for people to yell to their converted already and harden their views? Or is there actually an opportunity when you go on a show like this to possibly persuade and change hearts and minds? And what I'm hearing from you is it's still the latter. There's still the opportunity.
Yeah, I think it's definitely still possible. I know it's happening because I've received messages about it happening. Unfortunately, I think on the other side, a lot of the anti-Israel guests, at least that I have been paired with in some of these debates, are not doing that. I don't think that they're making a good case for the Palestinian cause. A lot of what they're doing is just screaming and shouting over other people. Anna Kasparian is a great example. I think in 1 hour, this woman didn't make a single argument. Everything that she said was, you're vile, you're supporting genocide, you're no actual arguments about what was happening on the ground, as if I am a IDF soldier inside of Gaza currently conducting the war. So it's ridiculous. For them, I think, at least what I've seen, it's simply a show, an outlet for their screaming. And in a weird way, it actually does a disservice to the Palestinian cause. But that's kind of what we've seen across the board since October 7th. I mean, the whole Free Palestine movement isn't really about Palestinians. It's about bashing Israel. It's about, subverting facts about how Hamas has been oppressing Palestinians on the ground. It's obsessively focused on criticizing Israel rather than building up a Palestinian society or a reasonable, moderate, and productive Palestinian cause that can help those people and help advance their future.
And there are moderate Palestinian voices that I think he could be bringing on his show, and for some reason chooses not to platform. So you have to, wonder why.
Maybe he's secretly pro-Israel.
Oh, he had, don't tell anybody. Sorry, Piers. He had Minister Shikli on and did not let the guy get a word in edgewise. And my view is, whatever one thinks of Minister Shikli and his views, he is a minister in a government. I cannot imagine Piers Morgan ever having a Qatari government official or an Iranian government official on his show and behaving as he did. I also want to just bring up very different contexts, but not dissimilar. the other night when he had Conricos with Anna Kasparian and a few other people. And Kasparian did what she did, which is basically just go ballistic and yell and scream. And Piers actually posted, gee, too bad. I just wasn't able to stop her. And, on both those occasions, different issues, but similar. Pardon my French, but, bullshit. You couldn't shut down Anna Kasparian. You shut down all kinds of people all the time. You could even have pulled her mic. She was so far out of line. And you, Piers Morgan, chose not to. And the same with Shikli. The level and degree of disrespect that he showed that man, whatever he thinks of him. Piers Morgan has interviewed some wildly odious leaders from regimes around the world and been at least polite. And those are two instances that I do think feed the "you're an anti-Semite" crowd. And I personally found them reprehensible that he would do that. Do you want to defend him before we sign off? Or try to...
it's not, for me, it's not really about defending him, but I will say just for accuracy that I believe it was a week and a half ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, he had a supporter of the Islamic Republic, someone who's been affiliated with them for a while, Marandi, he had him on, and he really dug into him. He said even after on social media, this is someone he would never have back. He ripped into him for several minutes about how he's defending a genocidal, misogynistic, violent, terrorist supporting regime, being the Islamic Republic, of course. So he has been pretty harsh.
Different from having on a government official.
Sure, yeah. Sure, but I also think that part of Piers's frustration stems from the fact that he's not actually getting any answers from Israeli government officials. He also interviewed Tzvi, and this goes back to a problem that we have internally in Israel, and that is that Israel doesn't really know how to frame information about what's happening on the war, at least at the government level, about what's happening in the war in a way that is transparent to the international community. We have, for some reason, struggled with this information war for a long time, when a lot of times we have the information and we just don't have good enough or strong enough representation in terms of hasbara or PR, diplomacy, to be able to actually explain this. And I think that, a lot of the questions he continues to ask, he asked me the same questions that he asked Tzvi and Natasha Hausdorff and several others about, why aren't they allowing journalists into Gaza? Why don't they know how many casualties there are on the civilian side? And those are, as a journalist, those are valid questions to ask. And there is, of course, a legitimate answer for them, which I gave him. Why didn't our government officials? It's concerning. And I think that that's why I said, if you're going into an environment where that's what you're going to be asked, where you're going to be, even if it's an unreasonable question, you need to be prepared for that. And I'm not sure that most of our government officials are prepared for that, and not specific to Hotaveli or to Shikli, but in general, it's a problem across the board in Israel. That being said, I also have a problem with some of Piers's approach myself personally. In some cases, when I've been agreeing with Piers, he'll continue talking over me until he realizes, oh, she's actually agreeing with my argument. So he has not given a lot of patience to people on the pro-Israel side. That being said, I think he's far from an anti-Semite, but I would encourage him to stop giving so much leeway to these fanatics who ultimately are harming not just the Palestinian side, but the entire conversation. It's really, really unproductive. And I think he does have the ability to shut them down, especially in the case of people like Anna Kasparian. If she was on the pro-Israel side, I would be mortified by this behavior. Absolutely mortified. And I don't understand why he would continue to allow this kind of conduct, because that isn't a debate. It isn't a debate at all. As I said, she didn't make a single argument. It isn't a conversation. It isn't a debate. It just shouldn't be.
He let her roll. And I have to say, it was quite feeble to have him post on X. I just couldn't control her. Sorry, not buying it. Disingenuous. Just not credible coming from you. You are the master of shutting people down. So I think Piers Morgan and the IDF and the government of Israel should probably turn to you, Emily Schrader, for some, media consulting. You got some good tips, and they should have picked up a few just from listening to this interview. Thank you so much. Thank
you. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Such an interesting conversation, and I appreciate you sharing so openly. Thanks.
Thanks for having me.
And now, let's get right to it with the Apostate Prophet, also known as Ridvan Aydemir. So wonderful to see you after so many months, Ridvan Aydemir, also known as the Apostate Prophet on YouTube, with more than 500,000 followers. And I'm one of them. I want you to know that.
That's awesome.
How are you, my friend?
That's a great honor. I'm good. It's been such a long time. Last time we talked was quite a while ago.
Well, we should tell our viewers and listeners that we had a rendezvous, Ridvan and I, in February in Berlin. We did some really amazing work that we still have to pull together and get out there, and we're going to. We were just plotting that. But that was your first time back in Germany since you'd left many years ago. Tell our viewers and listeners, because many of them may not be familiar with you, who you are. And, you have such an interesting backstory. So let's talk about that for a few minutes, and then we'll get into Piers Morgan.
Let's do that. Yeah, so I started out with my activism and with my online presence many years ago. Because I came from a Muslim background, grew up in a Muslim family and practiced Islam very strictly, came from a family that practiced Islam and preached Islam very strictly in a very traditional, but also kind of mainstream way. And I saw that it had lots of problems. And after a while, I left Islam after a long time. I'm really dumbing it down right now. But then...
I have to fill in a few really key blanks there. Ridvan, you were born in Germany.
Yes.
Your parents had emigrated there from Turkey.
Yes.
I believe you grew up until age 15 or something in the Stuttgart area.
That's
I
right.
went to public schools, so we're quite assimilated during the day. Going to German school, speaking German, having German friends, and then going home to, as you've explained to me, a quite religious and traditional home. And then when you were 15, your parents decided, okay, enough of living here among the infidels, we're going back to Turkey. And it wasn't at some time around then that your inner intellectual, spiritual awakening, whatever you want to call it, began?
Yeah, it was in Turkey that I was exploring. I was very rebellious in Turkey because I really grew up and loved the German way, the European Western culture. And in Turkey, I couldn't really make sense of things. There was a great culture clash happening in my head. And it was the Islamic culture and even kind of a secularized Islamic Muslim culture versus the German side and the Western side in my head. But lots of events happened in my life. First, I turned toward socialist, communist pursuits to fight the injustices in the world as a late teenager. Then an event happened where my aunt who was very close to me, was killed by her then husband, whom she was trying to divorce, and he was kind of coming from a traditional religious perspective, which really destroyed my world. But although I should normally at that point turn away from tradition, I turned more toward religiosity, became extremely devoutly religious after that. But then that just opened up a lot of problems because I started studying Islam very thoroughly and reading the Quran several times and Islamic history and Islamic scholars and all that, and analyzing things, practicing very devoutly and praying that I stay within it, but then also recognizing how bad the religion actually is, how problematic it is, how morally messed up it is, how wrong it is, and so on. So over several years of studying and practicing and preaching it myself, actually, I ended up leaving Islam because I came to the conclusion that it's kind of that it all relies on a very, very poorly written, dumb book, and that it's also a very hostile and disgusting. Just to give an example, we kind of went over this, but when I was younger, growing up in a Muslim family, I learned from a very young age that in the near future there will probably be the time when, before everything comes to an end, and this is Islamic eschatology, basic Islamic eschatology actually, that we Muslims would fight the Jews and exterminate them, kill them, destroy them all. And even the trees and rocks would be helping us. and not just the Jews, but the Christians that we are living among in Germany, for example, were described to me as hypocrites, immoral pigs, and so on. And we can't trust them, we can't really befriend them. But the Jews were always the worst. So these are the things that I learned, but it was always contrary to how I actually experienced the world. And it took me very, very long to figure out that clash and to eventually come out against it. And the thing is, when I left Islam, something really bothered me, which is that there is, over the last decade especially, there is a heavy Islamization effort going on in the West, and lots of Islamic apologists try to tell non-Muslims that Islam is misunderstood, that Islam is actually totally a religion of peace, that these narratives are all wrong. That the problems in the Middle East are because of Israel and this and that. And I knew from everything that I learned in practice that this is complete nonsense. So I wanted to go out there and tell the truth about all of this. And that's how I started out. Oh. And here I am.
And you started out kind of YouTubing in 2017-ish, is that correct?
Yeah. End of 2017 is where I started.
And you live somewhere in Illinois, right? You're American, you have a partner, you have little kids, you're like just another normal, boring Illinois guy.
Yeah. Just living somewhere in America. Yeah.
So I can't remember. Well, I do sort of remember. You did come to Israel, I think, in the last year and a half. It was after October 7th. We met through a mutual friend and kept in touch kind of sporadically. And here we are again. And I found your way you communicate and your thoughts fascinating. And also the way in which you communicate your epiphanies about Islam, about your relationship to Islam. You communicate them so intelligently, articulately, and not hysterically. And I personally really appreciate that, because that's a quality that is in short supply these days. Just kind of, sane discussion. Maybe you're not always that way, but that's my experience of you.
It's kind of funny that you put that, because often I think that I'm very emotionally involved and quick to become extremely passionate about this kind of stuff. But I try to keep it reasonable and try to keep it rational most of the time. Yeah, thank you.
Well, I mean, I'm sure you feel it inside, but I guess what you're doing is very professional, and you're kind of, sublimating it, because that can be alienating to a viewer or a listener, right? When you bring too much of yourself into it, which in fact totally segues into the subject of our discussion today, which is Piers Morgan and his huge show, Uncensored, which has millions and millions of viewers. It's on YouTube. He owns it, which he reminds us of at every opportunity. He controls it. He is very engaged in selecting the guests. And he certainly sets the tone. And as I've said in other interviews in this series, he comes from what sometimes is called a yellow journalism, more commonly called tabloid journalism. That's his background. That's where he cut his teeth and earned his stripes. And that's kind of the world, I think, where his ethics and his approach were formed. Having said that, Piers Morgan and his show have, in the period since October 7th, become very important. We live in this world with a very kind of fragmented media environment where legacy media is largely discredited and denigrated, and much of it is well-deserved. But we've also seen the rise of independent media, and the independent media world is turning out to be, in my view, very similar to the legacy media world that it hated so much. It's dominated. The independent media world is dominated by a few giants. It's like this kind of oligopoly. And Piers Morgan is one of the big names.
He has it figured out. I mean, that's the funny thing about him. On the one hand, he's a horrible person and actually a horrible voice in the new media. On the other hand, I kind of have to give him one thing, which is that he was smart enough to actually contrary to much of the legacy media, he figured it out that what he actually needs to do is to transfer his whole stuff to the new media, to YouTube, to online, and just carry it on there. And there's probably much more benefit, much more money, much more exposure. And he knows it, and he points it out all the time. He points out how, oh, this conversation that I just had has got 1 million views now. Gosh, it's like something very tragic, very horrific happens, and that's what they're talking about, and all he cares about is how many views it got. It's really messed up.
And the other thing that he was quite visionary and prescient about, in addition to moving his platform to YouTube, was jumping on October 7th. And this horrific tragedy with very complex background and present, and exploiting it. The real issue is Piers Morgan has a platform. He has tremendous influence. And how is he using it? Is he using it to make money? Is he using it to stoke already very inflamed passions and problems in the Middle East? Does he even care? But he does have this power. And what I say is, when people like Conricos and Emily Schrader, who I also interview, and others go on the show, they elevate the horrible people who he brings on. They dignify his approach. You've had your own experiences with Piers, and I gather he's blocked you. He hasn't blocked me yet, but probably will now. But just give us a bit of the background, your own interactions.
Well, I never actually appeared on his show because here was the thing. I was actually in contact with his show, with the person who arranges the guests and invites them and all that. And I was told that in no time they would invite me on to talk about a certain aspect of the conflict that is going on. And as we were in those talks, I also made clear that I really do want to talk about a certain aspect of it, which I think people are not talking about, which is the religious aspect of Hamas and Palestinian terrorist organizations and all that. After that, they kind of left it hanging there, and I didn't receive a response from them. A while later, Piers Morgan was having these fights online about why he doesn't want to have a conversation with Tommy Robinson, and he was pointing out that Tommy Robinson is an Islamophobe and a bigot, and I won't have a conversation with an Islamophobe and a bigot. And then he goes on and actually invites first Candace Owens, and despite the things that she has said over the years, I would say this is still a mild example. Candace Owens has become really, really messed up in terms of her anti-Semitism and her anti-Israel narrative, but still she is very well known as a public figure. So I guess I could understand that somewhat. And then he invites on Dan Bilzerian, who goes out and says that first off, the Holocaust didn't happen, but secondly, they deserved it. And then it describes Jews as demons and as monsters and so on. Andrew Tate, just because of publicity. And then he invites on some other people, like this guy called Myron, who's known online for doing the Nazi salute, for saying that Jews deserve what they get, that Jews are demons, that Jews are evil, that the Holocaust is a lie, but they also deserve it. So again, the same thing. He invites these people on. So I started a series of responses saying, pointing out how hypocritical it is that he won't have a conversation with Tommy Robinson. Think about him whatever you want because of his supposed Islamophobia and bigotry. But then he goes on and actually invites people whose only reason to be on there is to point out that Jews are not humans, basically, and that they deserve it, and that the Holocaust didn't happen or they deserved it. I called this out. In response to me calling that out, he just blocked me. And when he was asked why he blocked me, he said about me, because he is an annoying prick and I block annoying pricks. So this is the thing. When you actually confront him and hold him responsible and expect him to have some, to reflect a little bit on the things that he does, to be consistent, to take some responsibility, what he resorts to is not to actually reflect on them, but to attack you, to fight with you, or to outright block you. From this encounter alone, but also from so many other things. I mean, he is one of those typical smug, elitist, British tabloid people that we have had the knowledge of from a long, long time ago. He doesn't care about values at all. But from these interactions, it's quite clear to me that this guy, he doesn't care about values. He doesn't care about responsibility. He doesn't actually care about human suffering, about what people are experiencing. He doesn't care about the truth. What he cares about is simply his business and how many views he gets, how many subscribers he gets, how much money he gets as a result of it. He can have a horrible conversation, something that is completely counterproductive, but he will just point out, well, it got this many views, so I will probably invite this person on again. So this is the kind of person that he is, and it is just such a poison. And it's very indicative of how bad this whole new media thing really is. There's something really good about the whole transition to new media, that regular people or random people who are not given a platform on mainstream media, on TV, can come out and share whatever they want. However, it also brings forth the worst in people, the worst in the culture, and for predators like Piers Morgan, who love to take advantage of things, to really milk the worst in people for their own benefit. This is a grand example of that. The guy doesn't care about truth. And I also think that when I see, for example, Jonathan Conricus, whom I respect so much, have be brought on there with some imbeciles, with some idiots whose only value it is that they yell and say dumb things. I mean, you just brought up Anna Kasparian. She recently shared the conspiracy theory that 9/11 was probably perpetrated by Israel because there were allegedly dancing Israelis there, which is a well-known fake conspiracy theory. Almost everything about it is complete nonsense. She publicly, openly shared that on Twitter or X. Such a person to be brought on with Jonathan Conricus and be put on a stage as equals is just ridiculous,
And that is a point I made. Somebody, went at Piers. Lots of people did. And it's funny. I think basically when he's not on the show, all he does is read his Twitter feed. But, and they said to him, like, WTF, why didn't you just shut her down? And he said, I tried, but I couldn't do it. And I wrote him back and I'm like, excuse me, you couldn't do it? You're the king of shouting people down. You can cut the mic. You let Anna Kasparian go on because I didn't write this part, because it suited your agenda that day. I think that Piers' show has evolved and changed, and he's reacted, and he sort of goes too far, and then he pulls it back, and he sees what works, and he sees what doesn't. But the rubber's really hitting the road, and there's a lot at stake here. A lot. And the question is, again, this is a conversation I had with Conricus earlier today, is, you said he's all about the clicks, he's all about the numbers. And somebody I saw a while ago said to him, you're trash, you're crap, nobody cares. And he says, oh yeah, well, it looks like a few million people do. Well, is that how we're judging quality and meaning? Is that how we're judging? And do you care about quality and meaning? Do you care about contributing in a positive way to this very public and global discourse? And what it comes down to, and Conricus went back and forth on this, is he an entertainer like his buddy comic Dave Smith? Is he the Jerry Springer of geopolitics? Or is he, as I think many people do see him as being, a serious purveyor of news and information? The man with the backbone, with the fortitude, with the guts to take on legacy media and show the world the unvarnished truth. What is he?
He's just a moneymaker. He's just a businessman. That's all he is. It is all a business to him. I mean, as said, there is no value to it at all. There is no effort to convey the truth. By the way, I have to point out Dave Smith, the comedian, is definitely not funny. I actually sat down to try and figure out if he's actually at least funny, but I sat down through like 5 minutes of one of his special shows, and I didn't even grin and didn't even smile, and I understood why he is not famous for his comedy, but
I've never
yeah,
had the pleasure.
please don't. But with Piers Morgan, there's one great indicator, which is since October 7, which has now been, it was over 1.5 years ago, and since then, so many people went on the show to talk about proportionality, for example, to talk about surgical strikes, to talk about urban warfare, to talk about why the war in Gaza looks like this and not like a different war where Israel can very well carry out precision strikes like recently in Iran, for example. Lots of people talked about what proportionality means, how the number of people that die in a conflict have very little to do with proportionality and what it actually means, and so on. So many people went on to explain this. Piers Morgan to this day doesn't understand it, and to this day still asks the same questions. Well, we've seen in this recent example that Israel can take out certain commanders with precision strikes, with surgical strikes. So why didn't they do that in Gaza? You had that question answered to you 50 million times by now. 50 million times by now, and you still ask the question.
Yeah, there's another obsession he has, which is going on and on, but not allowing international media in. Now, some international media are allowed into the Gaza Strip and have been, but as you might imagine, it's a pretty high-risk undertaking. And Conricos explained that he's said on air to Piers many times, I'd be happy to arrange it for you and go in with you. But Piers has never taken him up on the invitation. So
too scared. So
whatever his reasoning for doing so or not doing so, but it does allow him to continue to go on about how the international media isn't allowed in. I personally would like to see a lot of them go in. And I mean, the IDF isn't going to be worried about taking care of them because they got a war to fight. So maybe Hamas will take care of them.
Maybe.
But
he recently even said this ridiculous thing. He made a post just where I don't know when that was, but several weeks ago he posted on X something about so Israel knew exactly where these commanders are, and Israel knew this and Israel knew that, but they had no idea that for decades Hamas was building tunnels. Dude, are you serious, man? Like, not even people who have like loosely followed the conflict think that or think that this is actually an argument, or this is actually a claim made that Israel had no idea about these underground tunnels and that they just found out after October 7 or something like that. And this guy has been running a show, has been milking the conflict for nearly 2 years now, and comes up with this ridiculous assumption, with this ridiculous claim that nobody has ever made. This guy clearly doesn't care about the facts.
Not only has nobody ever made it, the IDF spokespeople and others have made the point repeatedly. Israel has known about the tunnels for a very long time. And again, my friend Conricos talked about having been in the tunnels in the early 2000s, ones along the Philadelphia corridor. So with the border between what was then Israel and Egypt, but is now the Gaza Strip in Egypt. So, but look, he says it. There's no one to challenge him. There's no one to hold him to account except for on Twitter. And he either calls you names like he called you, or he just ignores you or blocks you. But that, I guess, is, what we're talking about is a real danger of the independent media. The independent media can accumulate huge power. A guy like Ben Shapiro also has significant power. Glenn Greenwald has significant power. Barry Weiss. There are many organizations that have very quickly turned into large and influential organizations, but they have no regulation, and they're not accountable to any, board of directors. The board of directors, in effect, is the internet, is how many viewers they have and how much money they make, how commercially viable they are. It's capitalism in extremis. And what we're seeing, I think, are some of the abuses when you have any system kind of taken to an extreme, right? Which is probably part of what turned you off communism in the early days.
Yeah.
This doesn't work the way it's supposed to.
It is true. It is true.
Ridvan, thank you so much. I think that you always have such an interesting and different perspective. And I really appreciate you sharing it with us. And I'm just tickled that I was able to catch you today.
Well, Piers certainly doesn't appreciate it, but I'm glad that you do, Vivian. It's always fun to talk to you. Always a great pleasure to talk to you, and always happy to do this. We have only, contrary to popular belief, apparently the Zionists don't control everything. So there is a lot of bad stuff going on, and we have only a little bit of power to counter it as much as we can. So that's what we do.
Except, I just want to put in the pitch here, for if there is that Zionist cabal out there, controlling all the money and the media and everything, hey, I'm here. I want a piece. How come I never get a cut? Thanks again, Ridvan. Wonderful to see you, and I hope we continue these conversations soon.
Thank you so much, Viv.
As always, thanks so much for being here. Please, subscribe, ring the bell, like us, love us on whatever platform you hear or watch us, and consider supporting us with a subscription. We'd really appreciate that. Until next time.
We love hearing from you, so please comment on our website, stateoftelaviv.com, or send us a note to hello@stateoftelaviv.com. On behalf of the State of Tel Aviv core team, Jan Zabo, our creative, graphic, visual, and marketing man, Amir White, producer and editor extraordinaire, sound guy, who is also impressively patient with me and my boomer tech deficiencies, and our social media manager, who pitches in on everything, Maya Naftalin. Thanks to the team. Thanks to you for being here. We'll be back soon.